Hello and welcome back to another Stranger Objects tutorial. My name is David Drayton and I welcome you to the show. I'm very happy to have you around because today, our second episode of C4D to B3D, gonna be nice. We're gonna have a closer look at the essentials of the Blender 3D world and how they relate to, let's say, the shortcuts or the interface elements that we have in Cinema 4D. So without further ado, let's dive right in. In Blender itself, when you open it the first time, what you'll find is that the default scene always comes with the camera. It always comes with the default cube, which I learned that the community, especially the B3D community, is just deleting it by default. I don't know why. Maybe it's a running gag, but we're going to keep it for this purpose. And it comes with a default light. But let's start with the most obvious thing that we can find in Blender, which is the viewport. And with the viewport comes the viewport navigation. And when I started Blender the very first time, it was quite different to what I had in Cinema 4D, because in Cinema 4D I had to use the Alt key, like Alt left click, Alt middle click, and Alt right click to navigate. In Blender it's a little different, but not too hard to navigate. Let me show you how it works. As soon as you're in Blender and you're using your mouse, I suggest you using a 3-button mouse to navigate. If you're using on the laptop, you should go and get a mouse. Just do yourself that favor. Working on a trackpad, I'm working on a MacBook. Oh, maybe I shouldn't say that, but I'm working on a MacBook and it's no fun to work in Blender with just the trackpad. So if you have a 3-button mouse, no matter how cheap it is, just hook it up and use that, because that makes your life much easier. So if you are in Blender right now and you are clicking with your middle mouse button here, then you will rotate around the scene. If you're holding down the shift key while holding down the middle mouse button, you will pan around the scene, which is pretty cool. And if your middle mouse button and use control or the mouse wheel, but first let's go with control, you will zoom or dolly into your scene. You can do the same thing by using, I don't know if you can hear it, maybe I just hold it to the mic. There we go. If you use your scroll wheel, you will zoom into your scene file. So it may take a while until you adapt that, but everything you learn, everything new you learn especially, there's a certain amount of muscle memory that you have to overcome, which you definitely should try to focus on. Maybe a little tip on the side. When I started to learn Blender, and I usually open it up like once a year in the last 15 years, and every time I opened it and I couldn't find what I was looking for, I just closed it and never reopened it. But with 2.8 I was convinced that the application is ready, so I opened Blender and said to myself, I will stick with Blender 1 month straight without using Cinema, without using anything else, just stood with Blender. And it was painful. I had a very hard time, but it paid off, because now there's so many things that I really came to love, which I'm looking for in Cinema 4D. This was just like the basic part of navigating in Blender. You can also use these buttons up here in the viewport. This is like the camera gizmo where you can rotate your view. You can just click up here. If you don't have a mouse installed, you can use these as well. But trust me, it's much more fun to have a mouse. Same as for the dolly and for the pan. If you have a camera in your scene and it's selected by default, which is indicated by this icon in the back, you just click this button and you are in your camera. One thing to remember, a huge difference in comparison to Cinema 4D. If you have the camera selected and you now start to rotate, you're not anymore in your camera. This really gave me a huge pain when I first started using Blender, because I couldn't understand, like, I just selected the camera, why are you jumping out the camera again? I like it now. You may dislike it, but there's a solution. Let me show you where. If we go and press the N key on your keyboard, you can bring up the, I don't know what it's called, the side panel, tool panel, whatever. And within the view itself, what you can do, you can select lock camera to view. And as soon as you tap this and jump again into your camera, which you can do by clicking this icon, or if you have a keyboard with a number pad, it's number pad 0. Let me just tap it. Now you will stay within the camera, and this is basically the same behavior as in Cinema 4D. And this was like, I think, tip number 1. Yay. Let me continue on. So let me just take this away. So the next thing I would like to show you is the main interface. We already went inside and I already showed you some shortcuts and stuff. But for this very first step, let me just talk about the viewport itself. So the main element is the viewport. And as you know, in Cinema 4D, if you middle mouse button, you will have the quad view. So if you come into view, toggle down to area, and then there's a menu entry called toggle quad view. Actually, basically, it's exactly the same thing as in Cinema 4D, because now see, if I middle mouse in one of these orthographic views, I can't rotate anymore as I could in the viewport. So basically, this is the same behavior as middle mouse button in Cinema 4D, but with that shortcut. I think it was Control, Alt, and Q, right? Control, Alt, and Q. I will put it somewhere in the video. Control, Alt, and Q. You can toggle the quad view in and out. There's another way, and I think it's more flexible, and I prefer going that way. Let me show you how it works. If you go close to the edge of your viewport, you can right click and say vertical split. It will give you that line that will split the view. If you use the tab key, you can toggle between a horizontal and a vertical split. In that case, we've chosen to vertical split, so let me split it. Now you have now you have two 3D views. These are both equal windows, and you can start splitting them. And I suggest when you start with Blender, you should get familiar with that technique, like splitting windows, because it's very useful. Because every window you split is a window for itself that can hold up everything you need, from a compositor to a shader editor to a to a graph editor, or if you like, I don't know what's useful too, like a video sequencer. So you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. But how do you get rid of these windows if you don't want to see them anymore? That's easy as well. You just go again in between those windows, and right click as soon as that cursor appears right there. Right click, and then you say join areas, and what it asks you, which area you want to join in which direction. So if you want that left window to join the right window, you have to point it in that direction. Click OK, and one more time, join the areas. Now we're going to go over here, and one more time, go in between, join areas and down, and you're set. Talking of Cinema 4D and the general interface, there are pretty much similarities in Blender as well. So on the left side we have a toolbar. On the top we have some certain informations. On the right, which is the outliner, in Cinema 4D it's called the oh my gosh, it's the object manager. It's not so, it hasn't been so long ago. It's called the object manager, and in Blender it's the outliner. It's down here you can find the property window, and the property window is basically the attributes manager. Everything in Blender is being managed down here. Scene files, render settings. I will go over these in a future tutorial. And show you how to switch render engines. I will show you how to use the particle system, etc, etc, etc. But for now, I want to let you know that this is more or less the attributes manager with basically the same settings. So if you're looking for something, you will find it right there. And at the bottom, of course, we have the timeline. And as you may have imagined, if you press play, it will play back, and if you reset it, you can reset it. Okay, one thing I would like to show you one more time. If we come in here, and I want to talk about that toolbar on the left. I would say it's a context sensitive toolbar, because depending on which mode, it changes. So if you press tab, which enables the edit mode, in which you can edit the vertices or the edges or the faces. By the way, 1, 2, and 3 stands for 1 is for the vertex mode, whereas 2 is for the edges. And if you press number 3 on your keyboard, you will go into polygon mode. You may have noticed that the toolbar has changed because we've changed context, right? So on the left side, we have all the tools like extrude, region, and insert facet. And if you don't want to hover over them and wait a second until the information pops up, what you can do is you go close to the toolbar and take a closer look at your cursor until it turns again into that indication that you could do something. Click, hold, and now drag to the right. Then you have like 2 rows, you drag again, you have text, and you can go even further. Oh yeah, one more thing. Before we stop or before we wrap up this video, as you may notice, in Cinema 4D, the top toolbar holds the controls for object manipulation. There is also a way to do that in Blender, and if you click one of those icons, you have this gizmo. So what that gizmo does, it's basically the same as in Cinema 4D. You can grab it and then you constrain it. For example, if you grab the Z axis, well, yes, Z is up, not Y. Z is up in Blender. You just grab it and drag it along. And if you grab in between, you will manipulate the Z and the Y. So it's in 2D space, so to speak, and you're not moving along the x-axis. Basically the same that you already know from Cinema 4D. Same as for the rotation gizmo, same behavior. You can drag along one of these axes, then you constrain to that axis, and so on and so forth. One little tip I would like to give to you is manipulating things in Blender can be super fast if you're using shortcuts. So the basic shortcuts, let me just reset this. Let me get rid of this because, oh, I don't need it, haha. No, just kidding. Sometimes I still have to look in there. But if you're using something like moving around, you can hold down G for, I call it grab. I don't know if it's move, but G sounds for grabbing, if you ask me. And then you can move along. And if you hold down, and if you now press down the middle mouse button, you can choose the axis in which you want to constrain the motion to it. If you let go, it's constrained to Y. Holding down the middle mouse button again, you can see now we're constraining it towards the x-axis. And if you go up the Z, it will constrain the Z. If you let go, it will stick. Another nice thing you can do is hold down the G button for grab and then press the axis you want to constrain it along. So this is my preferred way to do it because I love shortcuts, and if you get the shortcuts into your head, as I mentioned before, you will work in the speed of light. So if you use the letter G for grabbing the object, now you press Y, you're constraining it along the Y-axis or X or Z. Same as for rotation. If you don't want to use those icons, if you don't want to click these icons, you just press R and you're rotating in, I think it's called screen space. So you're using, depending on the camera projection, you're using the rotation for your object. But if you press R again, now you have some kind of orbiting rotation of your object. And if you only want to constrain it again, you just use X, Y, and Z, the according axis, to constrain it along. Let me just, oh, did I? Oh no, I have to come back and press R for rotation and X to constrain it along the X-axis. Even the axis in the viewport is being highlighted, which is really cool. And if you press Y, the Y-axis, and of course number Z, not number Z, Z as a shortcut, the Z-axis. Same is for scaling. One thing, scaling works pretty much the same way. You could use a scale, of course, in here, whereas if you, if you are inside this cube, inside of this white circle, you can scale, like uniform scale your object. If you use one of the axes, then of course you will scale along those axes, and if you use one of them in between, then you are constraining the scale, and without, in this case, without the x-axis. Scaling works the same. Let me just reset everything. Where is it? Alt S to reset a scale, or Alt R for rotation, Alt G for grab. Alt is a very cool shortcut because if you remember, Alt is in, I think it's 90% of the times, it does the opposite. So if you grab something and put it somewhere and you press Alt-G, you will reset your action. It's not undo, it's resetting the transformation. Yeah, maybe somehow like that. Depending on where the mouse actually is to the object's location, let's say we are very close to the center and you hold S or you press S for scale now, what you'll notice that you can scale super fast. If the mouse is somewhere more off of the screen to somewhere here and you press S again, you can see that your motion is slower. So at first this was very frustrating for me because sometimes I had the mouse where I was modeling or extruding and then I started scaling and then it was like poof and everything was huge. Not something that I wanted to do. So I've learned to, if I use those, I call them super shortcuts like scale, S, G, and R, to precisely put my cursor somewhere around the object for a precise rotation. So if you're somewhere in here, you will run into very bad issues. If it's too close to the center of the object or the axis of the object, then crazy stuff will happen. You don't want to do that. So just be aware of the fact if you are too close to the center, you will scale insanely fast, and if you're a little further away, you can precisely work with your object. According to object manipulation, as we're right at it, we want to, if you hold down the shift key, you can go very slow. I don't know how it's called. I call it precise mode. It helps a lot if you want to arrange things. It works as well as in move. So if you hold down shift now, you can see it slows down. You can place your objects very precise. If you hold down while grabbing to control, it's a constraint. And I think it's constraining it to the grid, because holding down control and doing something in Blender means that you're enabling snapping temporarily. So control and doing something is like a temporary snap. It's not like in Cinema 4D where control means that you're constraining the axis for a rotation about 5 degrees each. I think it works here too, but I'm not sure. Now let me just try R, Y, and now we constrain. Oh yes, it does. If you take a look up here where my mouse is just up here, you can see if I hold down control, it will do a 5 degree constraint as a constraint motion or rotation as well. Pretty cool. See, even I learned something doing that series. So I think this is pretty much it for episode 2. There's so many things I would like to talk to, and if you like what you saw today and you want to see more, just let me know in the comments what are you interested in. Please consider subscribing, turn on the notifications, and I'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching. I'm David Samuel Drayton, and you stay safe, stay home, and stay healthy.